What a title. By the way, I made a quick mistake with the title. It used to say do more with Windows Server and SQL Server on Azure, and it really should be with Azure. I'm Bob Ford for Microsoft, a principal architect on our Azure data team. I'm excited also today to be joined by Dilip from AMD. Dilip, raise your hand. So in the middle of our presentation, Dilip will come up and talk about some of the great technologies AMD has with SQL Server and Windows. But you'll notice a name on there, Jeff Woolsey. Anybody know Jeff Woolsey from the Windows Server team? Yeah. Where is Jeff? Jeff was supposed to be here but could not make it a SQL bit. So I'm going to be Jeff Woolsey, kind of like doing some stuff on Windows. And what that means is this. We want your questions, okay? And we're going to stop at a known spot during the actual presentation to answer those questions. So save those for those times, both online here in person. And then as well afterwards, we'll take some of your questions as well. I must admit to you, I'm not Jeff Woolsey. So I will take as many questions as I can from some of the presentation things that Jeff has given me. But if I can't answer them, I know Jeff. So I can redirect those to Jeff and get those answers back to you. I'm sure you're going to want the presentation. Everybody wants, like, where's your presentation? You can get it right now. AKMS Bobward MS, which I'll post again at the end of this session. You can download the complete deck, which includes recordings of demos that we'll go through in today's session. So with that in mind, let's get started and get going. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to take a little bit about, and just real quick, just to let you know, this is a similar session that Jeff and I did at Microsoft Ignite last November. Had a great turnout for it. And some of the content involves like, what did customers tell Jeff about Windows, which also applies to SQL Server. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll get into a few sections here. We'll talk about some patching and updates. We'll talk about Azure Arc a little bit with hybrid capabilities. Then I'm going to invite Dilip to come on stage and talk about the great story between AMD and SQL Server. We have a few little things about security to talk about, and then let's do some futures at the very end, some fun stuff at the very end of our presentation. And then at the very last slide, which you can get when you download the deck, get some resources for you to go dive into more information. Okay, so this is a very interesting poll that Jeff had done surveys with customers for Windows Server, which again applies to SQL Server, which is, can you make updating and patching easier? Sound familiar? Can you have more enhanced security features? And by the way, I want more hybrid. It was funny, when I was at Ignite, Jeff made this statement, which I totally agree with. No one that we know today that we talk to is just cloud. No one that we know today is just on premises. Most people are in both worlds, are thinking about being in both worlds, which is why hybrid is such a great story to talk about. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of that. We're going to talk about a little bit about what it's like to be in Azure, what it's like to be hybrid, and what it's like to be also on premises. So let's kind of go through a little bit and first talk about patching and talk about a feature that Jeff has talked about, a hot patching for Windows Server Azure Edition. Now, I'll just tell you up front, SQL Server itself does not have hot patching yet. It's something I strongly desire us to do because of this story right here. Anybody heard of Xbox? Did you know that the Xbox team runs the entire service in Azure in virtual machines with SQL Server and Windows Server? And notice Jeff's comment here. Before the hot patching came out, it took 3 weeks to roll out changes for all these servers. Look at the comment about hot patching, which is updating Windows Server, guys, without reboots, in memory, 1,000 servers in 48 hours with 0 downtime. That's pretty compelling. And in fact, he gave me this little demo to show you. So on the right-hand side is going to be us hot patching a Windows Server. And on the left side is going to be us with just the normal update process of Windows Server. I'll tell you also up front, you may be wondering when you do hot patching, when a cumulative update comes out, then we start over again and start hot patching from there. That's like the baseline. So on the right side, hot patching with an app, and his app is just copying files. That's the app. And that app copying files never goes down. Stays consistent, runs with no downtime. On the right is just a normal traditional Windows update with a similar copy operation. That's the sample workload we're doing. And he has a little demo timer he's going to do, and we're going to fast forward some of it a little bit. The time to do this is crazy. So here he is clicking the demo timer, starting off. And again, on the right-hand side is a command line interface to go hot patch a Windows Server, but he's going to give the other server a head start. Let's go run a traditional update in Windows and see it take off. It hadn't even started doing a progress update, and the hot patch is done in like a second. So I was talking to Jeff about this demo, and I'm like, Jeff, why did you do a second one? So he's showing the install, and he says, you know what? I don't have to wait time for that. I'm going to do another hot patch while this thing is actually running. So he's like, okay, let's just go kick another one in. You see the timer up there as well. You see the apps running down below. You see over in the left-hand side, like 12%. Let's just go do another one. So in seconds, he has successfully put 2 patches to Windows Server on. And when I mean patches, by the way, I mean actual updates. Not like a hot fix, but an actual update to Windows. It's finished. The traditional update, as you can see, is struggling to still continue at 13%. And over here on the right-hand side, his app, his copy, is completely online, never down. So it's about a minute into this thing. Maybe we should kind of spin forward a little bit of the timer. So, now this is running. Let's kind of accelerate, by the magic of acceleration of demos. And then let's see, you see this thing progressing 100%, and it's great. It finally finished. Uh-oh, it's a reboot. Notice on the right-hand side, no reboot required. So in a matter of seconds, we've been able to do 2 patches to Windows. On the left-hand side, a traditional update that took 8 minutes or so and required a reboot, so there's downtime for the application. This is the promise of Windows hot patching, which is available only on Windows Server Azure Edition or on Azure Stack HCI. So check it out. That's pretty cool technology. I love that. I think it's a great story, and it's what has helped make Xbox successful to manage their environment. And what about SQL? Well, for Azure Virtual Machine, one of the feedbacks we received from customers is that they wanted a way to do updates to SQL Server, not just security updates, and Windows Server in a very easy fashion from the Azure portal in Azure Virtual Machine if you're running in that environment. If I'm running SQL in Azure Virtual Machine, I would love the ability to go and say, hey, can you not just do security updates, but can you do cumulative updates? Kind of like having access to the Windows Update Manager in the VM, outside the VM. Let me show you what it looks like. So over here, I've got a Windows VM that I've got running here with SQL Server, and I'm using the new update option with something called the Azure Update Manager. It's a new option you'll see when you install SQL Server for Azure VM. So you're going to get interfaces now to go enable this technology, and when you do it, we can go into the VM and recognize, is there like a CU update for SQL that you don't have? Or maybe even a Windows update you don't have. So I'll go say, check for updates when I enable it, hit OK, and now in the portal, not in the VM, I can see different updates that need to be applied to my system. Does this look familiar? You might see this yourself inside a virtual machine itself. Well, that's pretty cool. So now outside the VM itself, I can do this. And I can do like a one-time update if I'd like to. Well, it's nice, but what I'd like to do this is at scale. So let me go through and look at all my SQL Server VMs running in my environment and say, hey, what would be kind of cool is I'd like to see all of these things and see if it's possible to update them as a group at scale. That's pretty cool. So I can selectively pick the ones I want. All the way, this is all command line driven too. I'm just showing you a portal experience. So I'm going to go through and say, oh, I'd like to go ahead and try this. Let's see what I get. And I can go through the process of a one-night update, or I can schedule updates. This is a new experience now. If you're managing Windows machines with SQL Server in the cloud for virtual machines, you have a whole new experience now to do update management at scale. So check it out. It comes only, though, if you've registered your SQL Server in Azure VM as a SQL Server, which you've used the marketplaces by default, or you can easily register yourself and do that separately. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Azure Arc. That was running in Windows, right? Let's talk about using the ability to use Azure Arc for hybrid cloud scenarios. So first of all, one of the things that we've seen from customers is the comment I made earlier about the fact that I need to do things across environments in this hybrid fashion, maybe across clouds. What if you're running Windows and SQL Server in other clouds? And you're like, well, how does that apply to Azure? Well, if you think about Azure Arc as a technology, I'm connecting a SQL Server, a Windows server, to Azure, not running in Azure. But that doesn't have to be just on premises. It could be anywhere those technologies run. So on premises or multi-cloud, Azure Stack HCI could be another environment. It could even be you're running, say, in a Google Cloud, or just using VMware technologies in general. And there's all sorts of capabilities that it gives you to be able to do this. One of those capabilities, though, is this with Windows Server. Let me show you here. First of all, in this screen, Jeff has gone through and registered like hundreds of Windows servers with Azure Arc. Just Windows, not SQL yet. Now, if you do SQL Server with Azure Arc, you're already Windows Azure Arc enabled if you're using Windows technology. So you already get this. So I was asking him when I was looking at this presentation before I came over, like, Jeff, what are you trying to show? He goes, well, I can see kind of a visual list of this, but we know where you're running, so I can see that. That is not where you're running in Azure. That's where you're running on premises. So now, because we have metadata information of where you've connected from Azure Arc, I can get geographical map visualizations of where my installations look worldwide across my data center footprint. Again, this isn't an Azure map. This is your map of where you're running your technology. And if you're running SQL Server in Windows, you get this for free because you are, by default, a Windows Server Arc customer. Now, what about SQL? You may have saw in the keynote a discussion about migration assessment. But did you know that there's also a monitoring solution to look at monitoring information for your SQL Server? Again, not running in Azure, just connected to Azure. Or maybe you want to take a look at some high availability DR management like availability groups or clusters or backups or point-in-time restore. Or, and we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation, you may be in a situation where you need to use what's called extended security updates. You're in an ESU situation with an older version of SQL Server, and you need a way of seeing that or maybe even paying for that in a different way. So what I'd like to do is show you, by the way, can you tell it's going to be a demo session? I'd like to show you an experience that I built for inventory. And somebody said, what do you mean by inventory? And I said, well, I've got all these servers running, and I want to look at all the different SQL Server instances. And what I'd like to do from the portal itself is, for free, look at these visualizations across my estate. Look at this. I got 43 servers and 118 instances of SQLs connected into Azure. And now I get rich visualizations about what's going on. Now look here. You can see here that this is even showing you across my data estate, not just in Azure Arc, but things in Azure. We better deny this message here from Teams. I thought I had that turned off. Anyways, so I'm looking at some rich information. I can see databases per server. Now look what's interesting here. I can see what editions I'm running across my fleet, how many cores per edition, what compat modes I'm running. That's something people want to know all the time. Or I can see is Defender running, I've got encryption, what versions of SQL Server across my fleet. Can you do this today across all your SQL servers? Do you even know where your SQL servers are? By connecting in a lightweight way with Azure Arc, you get these rich, deep visualizations. Now, what's interesting is that we're storing this data in something called Azure Resource Graph. Now, you may not know what that is, but that's okay. That's a free service in Azure where we store metadata. And if the metadata is stored there, not only do you see these rich visualizations, you can run queries against it. You may have seen in this conference the concept of Kusto. So you can run Kusto queries out in the cloud to even go deeper than what I show you here. So this is a great example of using what I call free inventory across your fleet. Again, not running in Azure, but connected to Azure. Now, what about migration? Let's kind of unpack a little bit, and then I'll stop right after this and see what kind of questions you have, because maybe you saw this in the keynote. I've got a SQL Server 19 instance that I'm running in my environment, and here's my goal. I would like to be able to run this Azure Arc agent and see is there any issues I might have if I wanted to migrate. So I'm not ready to migrate yet. It could be months out. But wouldn't it be cool if I could run something that's lightly connected to Azure, in a private connection, encrypted, and you could run some lightweight tooling in my environment, and first of all tell me, are the features I'm using compatible for various Azure services? And what's the performance look like? Has anybody in this room tried to make a migration to Azure SQL Managed Instance? Anybody tried that? You have. Was it easy for you to decide, if you want me asking, how many cores you needed, what service tier to pick, what storage you needed? Was that just like a simple exercise? And the answer is just like, it's not just a head shake. It's like, no, man. I get it. And what we're trying to do is build some tooling to help you do that. So here's this 19 instance. I've been running what's called the migration assessment. Again, some lightweight code in our agent services that are querying your SQL Server. And we exposed to you, by the way, what we're doing if you looked in the agents itself. So I click here, and notice here, as you saw in the keynote, it thinks I'm ready. Well, what does ready mean? Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you where you should go, what your configuration should probably look like to match the performance characteristics of what you're running on premises. And I've got a confidence rating about that. And behind the scenes, I'll tell you why I thought that. I looked at your data, I looked at your performance I/O, your CPU resources. Not only that, I'm going to tell you how to do it. Go click this link, and I'll show you an online migration way to go actually do the migration. Maybe Azure VM's your choice. No problem. We can handle that as well. The same confidence rating. We can tell you what tools and tell you what VM size to pick. But here's the problem. I'm using cross-database queries. And today in Azure Database, that's not supported. So now you know already, before you've made this decision, unless you want to change it, that you cannot go migrate to Azure Database. We call this the Migration Assessment for Azure Arc. It is using similar technologies as the Azure Migrate Center that you may have heard and seen today. Okay, great time to stop and pause for some questions. Anything online so far? Or they're just so blown away by what we have. How about inside here? We're going to run the mic around a little bit. Let's see if you have any questions about what we've shown so far. There's a question right here. Right, can you do this up? Oh, sorry, we'll get back to you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. You show us some reports or metrics which show which compatibility level our database are. Is there any chance you can drill down to see not the number, but which one?
Yeah, the question is that for compatibility levels, can you drill down and see which one? First of all, I did show you which ones, but I didn't show you which databases had that. And the answer is you can. Now, I didn't show you that in visualization, but remember I said we have the Custo query language available to you. So we have examples to show you how to do just that. We show you all the metadata we're collecting, and we show you how to build queries to do the drill down. And then because it's in Custo, by the way, you can build your own workbooks to visualize that if you want to. Yeah, go ahead.
Just what you were saying
Can
there,
you put the mic up there a little bit?
Yeah. Sorry. What you were saying there about cross-database queries are not being supported. So if a manager asked me one day how to go about cross-database queries, what would I tell a business manager?
That if you had cross-database queries, what do you do?
Yes. Because you say it's not supported, but if you say we need to go to the cloud, then
right.
Then why? I'm guessing that the suggestion would be to migrate them. To migrate that, was it? If
it's a great question. It's a great question. I remember even my workshop. You're like an expert now, right, in cloud migration. So cross-database queries are not supported in Azure Database, but they are in managed instance. So you notice here, managed instance and Azure Virtual Machine, we're ready to migrate. And even if you're using cross-database, we could use that as our target.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so you can. So as long as it's in the managed instance, you can use that as your target.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of this tool, by the way. It's a great question because I'm telling you what's not available, but I already told you what is available. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Next question.
One question about the patching. Will that support
about the hot patching? Or the update manager?
The patching on-prem through Azure Arc. Would that support only standalones or clusters, AGs?
Yeah, so we support in SQL Server with Azure Arc only security updates today to do that in Azure Arc. In Azure Virtual Machine, that update manager we talked about is standalone today in VMs, but they want to add the ability to do that for clusters and make it like rolling updates and all that stuff, but that isn't supported today. So is that kind of what you meant? Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
It's quite a bit of sensitive information gathered there, like location, patch level, what the names of the servers are, and so on. It's stored at Microsoft securely.
It's a great question.
Is it somehow possible to minimize the risk that this data will be leaked? Is it, for example, possible to put on-premise Custo database on my site so that the Arc only collects the information, puts it in my on-premise data, and it's not stored anywhere except my data center?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I must tell you, I'll repeat the question a little bit here. It's about the security concerns about metadata in your environment being in the cloud now, which is a fair concern. It is protected. It's secured by you. Azure RBAC controls the rights of who can see that data in your organization. That's purely secured in the cloud as a set of metadata. By the way, not your data, just the metadata part. We do not have an on-premises solution that does this today. Today, Azure Arc only supports storing this information in the cloud, and unfortunately, there's no way to control what metadata. We go document what we publish about your database names, your compat levels, your service names, whatever those look like. So it is fully secured in the cloud by you. You control that, but there is no on-premises solution to do that same capability today. One other question. Yeah.
I saw that you have the MI in container, which potentially you can use Arc solution on premises.
The question is that you have this MI container solution Arc. You're talking probably about Azure Arc managed instance, right? Is that what you mean? Yeah, so there is a solution called Azure Arc Managed Instance, which we're not talking about today, but just to let you know, this is running SQL Server in containers in Kubernetes on premises or in other clouds and giving you that managed instance feel. So we do have that offering, but that's not something I'm covering today.
My question regarding the Arc is how much overhead which they'll put on the operation on the system, as well as how often the Arc will.
Your question is about the Azure Arc we're talking about here. The question is, first of all, is there any overhead, and how often does this work? So first of all, the overhead is like negligible. Like I've run high performance workloads inside my SQL Server, and I don't even recognize this is going on. As far as Azure Arc goes, the actual refresh of information varies a little bit. So like the inventory is refreshed every hour. The performance monitoring is refreshed in like near real time. And the migration assessment, it's in public preview today. And right now, I think it's on an hour, but they're looking for feedback on how often should we go run that, and can you control that information? Okay, let me move on, and we'll continue to take some questions later in the session. Thank you. Great questions so far from the audience. Let me go ahead and move on, sir. Let me go ahead and move on. I'm going to move on, and then we'll take some questions later. Thanks. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I bring Dilip up here because I personally think the story between AMD, SQL, and Windows is pretty amazing. And the reason it's amazing is two things. Number one, I love to see SQL running super fast. And number two, behind the scenes, you should understand there's a deep engineering relationship between our companies. Like I personally know our performance team. They talk in some sort of language I don't understand, but they know how to talk to AMD team as well. We're always looking for innovation. How can SQL Server run faster on AMD? So I'd like to bring up Dilip now and talk about the AMD story. Dilip.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dilip Ramachandran, and I'm a Senior Director of Marketing at AMD with the Server Business Unit. And I work with Microsoft on a lot of joint solutions and go-to-market activities. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about how SQL runs on AMD. But before I dive into that, I want to just ask a trivia question. How many of you own Xbox consoles in your home, the thing that Bob talked about? A few hands, okay. Do you know what powers that product? Okay, some of you are nodding. It's based on AMD. It's a client version of the product that we work with Microsoft. We have as Bob mentioned, we have a very deep relationship with Microsoft across multiple segments. So, but today I'm going to talk about SQL Server running on AMD EPYC. And one more question, just a quick one. Show of hands on how many of you care about performance of SQL Server? Okay, you're in the right place. So let me keep going here. So I'll first start giving you a bit of introduction about the different type of instances that are running on AMD-based hardware. And you can see here on the left-hand side is kind of what's most commonly used, the general purpose instances, the D, E, and the Fs as well. And at the bottom, you see something very interesting, confidential computing. It's actually a term that's an area which has been pioneered by Microsoft, and we've collaborated very closely with Microsoft on enabling these confidential VMs where essentially the VM is encrypted with its own key, so your data is fully protected. So that's available. We'll talk more about the performance on D&E later in the presentation. Also, we have high-performance compute instances, visualization and accelerated. You can see some of the GPU instances that are there that are based on AMD GPUs, data center GPUs, as well as virtualization GPUs. And then last area is storage optimized, the NVMe instances, LASV3 being the latest of that. I want to talk about some performance that we've run on AMD-based instances and compared them against the Intel equivalent instances. The ones in blue are Intel, the ones in orange are AMD-based. And here we've done a TPC-H type workload on Azure Cloud. And what you see here is anywhere up to 15% better performance per dollar. So many of you you might be looking at spend, right, that you're doing on Azure Cloud. If you're spending, let's say, $1 million, you're literally saving $150,000 by running it on AMD-based instance. And we have E and D instances here. The shapes are 16 vCPUs and 32 vCPUs. And again, you can see here, right, the value of running it on AMD. The performance is better. Performance per dollar is better, which is really what a lot of people care about in the cloud. What's next on Azure? So we talked about some of the performance on the V5 instances. These are codenamed Milan, or our third generation EPYC. We've launched the fourth generation EPYC, and Microsoft has partnered very closely with releasing those as well. And we are about to launch that very soon. And they will be providing 20% better improvement over the V5 instances. And then we also have an F series instance, which is very compute intensive. And you can see it's almost 2x and promises to be the best out there in terms of compute instances. So this is coming soon. It's in preview right now. Stay tuned for the full availability very shortly. I want to talk about some of the benchmarks and performance that we've collected on our fourth generation EPYC. And we've done a variety of workloads here. And you can see at the top bar is our 96-core AMD EPYC 9654 product. And we call that, as I said, we codenamed that Genoa. And we're comparing it against the fourth generation highest-end Intel processor, Sapphire Rapids. And then you can see the third generation ones for reference here. So you can see how much of performance uplift we provide, especially from an on-prem perspective. When you look at it, it's just quite dramatically significant. Based on that, we've been able to create more than 300 plus world records across a wide variety of applications. Infrastructure, business applications, database clearly is another area, and I'll talk more about it in the next slide, as well as some engineering HPC type applications. So particularly database. This was just announced a couple of days ago, so just in time for this conference. And we partnered with Dell very closely on this one. And here we have a dual socket Dell server that has a performance of this is again TPC-H 10 gigabyte performance results, about 2.7 million. And then you have the Intel-based Sapphire Rapids product, highest end product, delivering about 2 million. So you can see how we are leading the performance curve on TPC-H. Again, this is for queries and analytics type performance workloads. And continuing on. The next one is TPC-E. So I talked about more about kind of a warehousing kind of benchmark. This is more of a old TP type benchmark where you can look at performance here. And we are particularly focusing on performance per dollar. And these are the top 5 results of AMD EPYC with SQL Server and Windows Server as well. And you can see here the orange bars are AMD to the right. So you want to have much better performance per dollar. And in this case, we are more than 25%, in the range of 20% higher than some of the Intel-based offerings that are on the left-hand side. So again, so this is something that is available today based on a fourth generation EPYC. These results are available. To summarize, where I wanted to leave it is that AMD EPYC with SQL Server provides the best performance in the industry today. And I just showed you the 10 terabyte benchmark here. And we do have more results coming on an ongoing basis, so stay tuned on that. But the performance optimization between the AMD team as well as the engineering team at Microsoft has been very, very good on this one. So we've achieved very good performance. It's also very scalable. So what you can see is, some of the results that I showed were actually on single socket servers. So essentially, a single socket server can compete very well with a dual socket server from Intel. And that results obviously in lower cost, lower power consumption, etc. So for example, the previous slide that I showed here, the numbers that are onto the right that are orange, that are AMD based, they're all based on single socket servers, whereas the ones that are Intel based are actually dual socket servers. So we compete very well that, and from that extension as well, a dual socket server can actually replace a 4-socket from Intel as well. So and that's very common with our customers. And the last area is energy efficiency, which is a very key topic, particularly in Europe. And we've shown that, based on performance analysis, that AMD servers actually provide up to 35% fewer servers and 29% less power compared to Intel offerings. So it saves you space, saves you power, saves you cooling, and with better performance and better scalability, it results in a really strong TCO, lower total cost of ownership for AMD compared to Intel. With that, I pass it back to Bob. Bob, what do you think? What do you think SQL Server on AMD? What do you think?
Dilip, I'll tell you what I think. In the words of Tom Cruise, I feel the need for speed. Sorry, I couldn't resist. I just watched that. So if you don't know Top Gun, that's a great Top Gun quote. So no, I love it. And Dilip, I want to make sure I emphasize to everyone out here, performance benchmarks matter a lot to me still, because people ask me, like, what is SQL Server capable of? Like, where's the standard? And it still matters. And I love the performance numbers, but I love the fact you talked about price performance, because that matters a lot to our customers. Now, you guys are going to be here tomorrow, I think? Is that right?
Yes, we'll be here. We'll be at the booth, at the Microsoft booth. Come by and talk to us. And,
so maybe tomorrow they come by and chat us more questions about what you talked about.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dilip. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little security, and then we'll kind of finish with some futures in here. I'm not sure if you've taken a look at Defender for the cloud. It runs across all Azure assets, especially SQL Edge to Cloud. What did I want to show you? Something you've not seen before, probably. And that's called the Data Security Dashboard in Defender. What's incredibly powerful about it is it looks at sensitive data sources. So here it's looking at brute force attacks, but only against the SQL servers that may have like credit card data or GDPR data or PII data. So we're able to go with Defender to look at your assets and say, look, you've got some pretty sensitive data sources. Let's show you possible attacks against it. Now, this one's interesting. I'm not sure if you've heard of what's called a lateral attack before. This is based on a true customer story where an intruder came in and attacked. Well, first of all, I'm sorry. This is showing an Azure database that's unprotected because it's using just a firewall. It's not using like a private link. So first of all, we can detect scenarios where you have sensitive resources that are not secured from a network perspective. But the one that's interesting to me, and of course you see it's on credit card data, so it's only showing you for sensitive resources. But the one that was really puzzling to me when the Defender team told me was called a lateral attack path. And in this scenario, an intruder went and attacked a virtual machine based on a known vulnerability that had not been patched. Okay, well that's so what? Well, they got in this virtual machine. It was running SQL Server. They were able to run it as an administrator, enable XP command shell, then run a command as an administrator to get a managed identity that's protected and go attack a database. Ouch. But Defender can go look at that ahead of time and tell you, do you have vulnerabilities like this in your environment before such an attack happened? This is called a lateral attack path in the cloud, and it's pretty serious stuff, which means you can use Defender to say, have I applied my vulnerabilities? Or do I have things like XP command shell that might be used to go attack certain things? So Defender for Data Security Dashboards, a new powerful tool from the Defender team to look at the vulnerability of your assets. Okay, so let's kind of end talking about some futures. Maybe you've not heard the news. Back at Ignite, we called it Windows Server vNext. They've already announced it's called Windows Server 2025. They have not announced when it's going to launch. But guess what? If you're a Windows insider, you can use it today. So let's talk a little bit about it. And again, I apologize. I'm not Jeff Woolsey. What I did is I picked out some of the things Jeff talked about that are interesting to me as a SQL Server user, SQL Server administrator. I want to show it to you. And then I have some resources at the end. But I want to make sure I don't forget to tell you, next week, virtually, is called the Windows Server Summit. Online is Jeff and other members of the Windows Server team talking about these technologies, free to join. So don't forget, if you're a Windows Server person, you go check it out. You can learn more about this. And then we'll end with some fun Copilot stuff. Okay, so there's a blog by Jeff that when you get the deck, you can take a look at it. One of the things that first struck me was storage. I'm a SQL Server person. I want things to run fast. So there's an optimization now for NVMe storage. So it's actually running SQL Server on NVMe as disks. Jeff showed me this demo. I'm like, well, what's the difference, Jeff? And he's like, well, look at this, Bob. If SQL Server ran on Windows Server 2025, all of a sudden now IOPS are accelerated just by running Windows Server vNext with no changes to SQL Server, no changes to anything, using NVMe storage, the same NVMe storage they would use on the current version of Windows Server. So I'm excited about that one. New performance characteristics. Now this one really struck me. Now, today, or excuse me, with Windows Server 2025, if you have GPUs where you may be running AI workloads on premises, you can start sharing GPUs across virtual machines. You can partition them at the host level. If you're looking in your environment about potential AI patterns, this could be extremely lucrative running Windows Server 2025 with Hyper-V. Now, this is the one that also struck me. If you're running updates for Windows Server, now you get the update experience inside Windows. And it looks like just a Windows update that you might run on your laptop. And the actual inline upgrade experience is a much better process. Personally, for me, as a SQL Server professional, I'm excited about this because I generally don't recommend customers do inline upgrades for SQL Server with Windows. I think I might change my mind now with what they're doing in Windows Server 2025. So I'm super excited to see what is going to actually happen in this space. Okay, you've heard about this Copilot stuff being discussed here so far at this conference, and it's super exciting stuff. Why is it exciting? Is it going to replace anybody? I don't think so. I think you're going to love some of the possibilities here. So what I want to show you some demos I built for Copilots, and I want you to think in your head as I show you these demos about how this would apply to SQL Server on premises, because that's where we're headed. We're not there today, but that's exactly where we're going. So first of all, you may not know, but inside Azure, without SQL, is already a Copilot today in preview for you to try. And I'm thinking, what do I care about this? I don't know about you, but I can't track of my spend in Azure, except when my manager sends me a nasty email. You're spending too much in Azure, because we have to pay for it ourselves in Microsoft. Look at this. Give me the top 5 resources by cost. Notice I hid how much I'm spending, but it shows me a breakdown by percentage, by resource type. So I can already get some information that today I don't really know how to go get and navigate in the portal. Another one is just break down my top resources by type. Man, what am I doing? Am I a developer? Am I doing hyperscales? Am I doing virtual machines? I don't really know where I'm using my Azure footprint, and I don't know how to navigate the portal to go figure that out. We had some comments during our workshop on Monday about navigating the portal, and I think Copilot may be a way to do that. Now notice here, it's actually running a KQL query for me that I could go run by myself and edit separately, which is pretty cool. I mean, to me already in seconds, I'm finding information that would take a long time to traverse in the portal. So I thought to myself, what else can this thing do? Well, I'll tell you what, show me the CPU usage of my virtual machine the last 2 hours. Now, you could go into maybe a graph to try to figure this out, but if I don't have time to go navigate what's going on, I'm like, hey, can you just show this to me? And can you show me in a graph? And if you scroll up, it can do that. It's showing me the graph. I could go drill into it, but here's what I love. It adds extra narrative to describe the graph. It's telling me, oh, by the way, yeah, you had this usage here, it went up here at this time, and this is the time that it really got bad. Maybe you should go look at that exact time and see what happens. Now, I want you to put your hat on for a second in your brain. What if this was a SQL server? And what if now you could go ask it a question about what is the utilization of SQL Server? And what are the top queries? Is that incredible? You could now all of a sudden now in a scenario that you consider a problem with your server, say, what's the usage? Oh, is it SQL Server? And what's the top queries? In a matter of minutes, something that could take a very long time to figure out. I'm just trying to give you an imagination of what might be possible with this technology. So speaking of that, what about SQL? And you see here, maybe you saw in the demo, in the keynote with Buck and Aaron, and also in my session with Joe Sack, this idea of like, my database is slow. And again, I want you to wrap your head around, what if this was an Azure virtual machine, or a managed instance, or a SQL server with Arc? Getting that same type of rich information to narrow down, yeah, it's CPU utilization, and oh, hey, here's the query. Now, That's interesting to me, but I want to do is I want to have, and this is really kind of scary to say, I want to have a conversation with this thing. I'm like, hey, that's interesting that you think that query has a problem and you think it might be maybe a missing index. Well, is it missing an index? And so like, hey, is this query missing an index without me doing any other research? And it's like, yeah, it is actually. And by the way, here's the index statement we think you might can go run on your own to go solve this problem. Can you imagine a world maybe where even at some point you say, I give you permission, yeah, go do this thing, or you say, what is the impact of running that index? So I'm trying to picture in your head where we're headed with this technology. And then this is one that we did not show anywhere. What is my backup history? So I can do this maybe potentially in the cloud to see where my backups are. Where is the earliest point in time restore I can do? Or maybe this is on SQL Server. Or maybe this is across SQL servers. What is the history of this particular database backed up over time? So again, rich information to show you when the backups took place and potentially even telling you, oh, by the way, if you wanted to, you could do a point in time restore over at this time frame. So you kind of see where we're headed with this technology. It's not replacing anybody. It's just trying to make your job easier, more efficient. But I will say this, and I'll say this with anybody I talk to, trust but verify. In this case, that's how I did it. I said, well, what query did you run to figure that out? I pulled the query up and say, oh, you know, I don't want the last 5. That's what you told me. How about the last 25? So easily, I just altered what it was trying to do to give me more richer information from a historical perspective. So we're at SQL Bits. You got to have some fun. Has anybody tried GitHub Copilot? Raise your hand. Do you even know what it is? You guys know what it is? You tried it? How about this one? I was playing around one day. This is really, my wife thinks I'm really sick, man. You're playing around with this stuff? I went into GitHub Copilot and I said, hey, build me an application using C# to connect to an Azure SQL database with Microsoft Entra authentication, okay? And yeah, with MFA, multi-factor authentication. And by the way, go run a query at the same time. Can you do that? This is actually a live, I didn't time-lapse this, guys. This is like just spit this thing out. I'm like, oh, that's not a bad template to start with. Now, this isn't going to build my app, but instead of going and finding example code somewhere, I would not mind Copilot. Oh, well, you know what? I made a mistake. Sorry, I need Python. Can you do that in Python? I didn't mean to use C#. Let's try that. Do Python instead. Sure. Yeah, I'll just change what I just did in Python now. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I showed this to Davide Mari. He said, Bob, I'm a Java developer. Oops, I meant Java. Okay, so Java. Click that. Now, you notice it has like accept, decline. So let's say I accepted it. Java, I'm good. And then I forgot, I'm old school. I've been around here for like 30 more years. I'm like a dinosaur. I'm a C++ person. So I copied it and said, oh, by the way, inline chat, can you change what I just accepted and make this C++? Can you make this C++ code because I'm old school? I think that's what I typed in. It didn't comment on the old school part. It didn't say, hey, you're old. But look what it did. Bam. Now I'm using ODBC with C++. I was at a developer den a couple of weeks ago, folks, and I was showing this stuff on stage in a keynote, and every developer walked up and said to me, am I out of a job as a developer? And I said, no, you're not out of a job. Go back to your company and get ahead of this technology. Go show this to your developers and show how you can have less bugs. You can get started better with better templates. Go build templates that maybe you can feed to Copilot. Go build a template like this. The GitHub Copilot team, to me, is one of those innovative teams in our company right now. There's a project called GitHub Copilot X, where they're working on how to actually make efficiencies with pull requests and team projects. It's all about making your development team more efficient, not replacing your development team. I would love to go back to my team and say, hey, we can reduce our bugs by 20% tomorrow if we'll start using this technology. And you should be the person that be in charge and lead that effort. That's my opinion about where some of this technology is headed. I have a feeling that 6 months from now, this demo will be something even crazier. Just real quick thing I showed there. I took a piece of code that I knew had a problem. I said, Copilot, what's wrong with this? And it says, oh, you got a SQL injection attack. Here's the fix. That ain't bad. I mean, that's got some pretty good legs to it, right? Okay, I want to end with a couple of statements here. We got a few minutes left. We want to take some questions. And I'm really serious about this. You may have heard Assad kind of touch on the fact about SSMS. You should know inside Microsoft that there was a project to to change me from using SSMS. It's like, we know we're successful when Bob doesn't use us anymore. And I said, prove it. Well, they haven't proven it. So we have now, actually, quite frankly, made a new initiative inside Microsoft, and you're going to see it loudly, that SSMS is alive and well. You may have seen me on social media. Somebody asked, is it going away? And I said, I'll give you the official word. It's not going away. In fact, we're enhancing it. SSMS 20 just came out. And look here at SSMS 21 that we'd like to do a preview. It's our plan for this calendar year. All sorts of new experience. Look at the bottom. How about a Copilot experience? Aaron Stellato, who runs that program, is here at this event. She's been talking about it. And if you'll go to that feedback site right there, Aaron is literally looking at your feedback to decide, should SSMS have that kind of feedback? So please, also the SQL feedback site, Aaron personally reviews this site to see what are the top voted items. Yes, I know you want a debugger. Yes, I know you want dark mode. She's still looking at those. Those are difficult to do. But notice here what's in the next one. New shell, 64-bit, new update experience, new installer experience, new connection experience. I definitely want that one. And then targeting your top feedback. So the team is now engaged at looking deeply at your feedback as SSMS. And I made a point to put this slide in because I want to tell the community we're serious about this. We want you to know this tool is here to stay, and we're going to make it even better. If you're using in your situation Windows Server, SQL Server 2014, hello, get ready. This summer is end of support for 2014. Maybe you haven't seen that. What does that mean to me? Well, you got three choices. You can modernize on Azure, go to Azure, right? Go to a new version of SQL Server, or get free updates, security updates in Azure, or you could actually run in Azure hybrid, Azure Stack HCI, and also get free extended updates. Or I've had some customers that cannot do that. They need to stay on premises. If you enable Azure Arc, you can start paying for extended updates on a now new monthly billing model. So if that's a new way you need to start paying for having extended security, you can do that with Azure Arc. Okay, so we're end of our session here today. I've created some resources for you, including a great resource Dilip gave me for AMD. So when you get the deck, remember it's at AKMS Bobward MS. You can go through and check this out. This is like deeper information about what I talked about today, including a link to this Windows Server Summit next week. If you're a Windows Server person or you work with a team that does use Windows Server, you need to go check that out because it's all online, it's all free. Folks like Jeff Woolsey talking about things like Windows Server 2025. We flew today, but think about what we talked about. We talked about hot patching, update management, Arc technologies, the beautiful story of AMD and SQL Server running together, Defender for cloud, new futures like Windows Server 2025, and Copilot technology. I don't know if you got the message enough in the keynote, but I'm just here to tell you, I'm an architect, a lead architect for Microsoft for SQL. SQL Server is here to stay. It is an important technology to us. We're actively planning the next release right now. I'm in the middle of that scenario right now myself, so we want to make sure we gave that message to you today. Thank you so much for attending our session. We're going to leave the QR code up here. I am also heading right now, as soon as we're done here, sprinting to the Ask the Experts area. So if you know where that is in the corner over there, myself and Anthony Nocentino will be there to answer your questions. And Dilip, you said your team is here at the booth all day tomorrow. Maybe this also after this session as well. Talk to Dilip about AMD technologies. Just a quick tease, I have some webinars coming up that I'm doing with AMD together to talk about our great products. So love to continue that partnership with them. Thank you so much. We'll see you at the rest of SQL Bits. Appreciate it.